new start and a different kind of failure. I once had a student that said, well, there's the line that basically explains writing in 303. Every time I get ready to start, it almost seems like I've got a whole new failure I'm about to do here. Why? Because we never can. One only has learnt, line 178, one only has learned to get the better of words for the thing one no longer has to say, or the way in which one is no longer disposed to say it. In other words, I want to sit down, I want to write a paper, I want to write a poem, I want to write a play, I want to write a note, I want to write something that somehow captures something I've never said before. This is very, very hard. We're back to earlier. He says, you say I'm repeating myself. Okay, I'll repeat myself one more time. Right? Of course, he's writing, he's Coker. And he's consciously aware that he is in many ways repeating what he did in Bert Norton. And so there seems to be some kind of struggle here. And so here's a genius writer writing about writing. We always want to pay attention. And so each venture is a new beginning, a raid on the inarticulate. Notice all of the war-type language here. In Dry Salvages, Part 3, we're going to hear about this war language from the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita Hindu text that is going to be a dialogue conducted out on a battlefield of all places. We'll get to it in our next discussion, right? A raid on the inarticulate with shabby equipment. I always wish I was a little bit brighter, shabby equipment. Always deteriorating. We're back to the opening lines and the ways in which houses deteriorate. In the general mess of imprecision of feeling, undisciplined squads of emotion. We're back to that idea from Yeats' Second Coming and a Jube's novel named after it. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold, right? And what there is to conquer by strength and submission, the two different ways of mystical training, contemplative training, has already been discovered once or twice or several times by men whom one cannot hope to emulate. We would say, of course, today, not just men, but women, right? I mean, pick up any Virginia Woolf piece of writing and we find ourselves going, well, I guess I'm never going to write that good, am I? We can't ever hope to emulate. But there is, notice the dash, there is no competition. And of course, this line at 186 reminds us of line 77, back to earlier, in that we think about those silent masters who are so great, though. Plato, St. Augustine, Dante, Shakespeare, Milton. All of those are going to factor heavily, obviously, in the mind of T.S. Eliot. But there is no competition, he says. It's almost like he's consoling himself, and of course us as well. There is only the fight, the struggle, to recover what has been lost and found and lost again and again. We think of Proust, don't we? I mean, you cannot help but think of Proust when you think about lines like this, right? Trying to recover that notion of lost time, right? The way our mind tries to do that. And now, and under conditions that seem unpropitious, he's writing this at the beginning of the war. T.S. Eliot quite literally wasn't sure how that whole thing would end. I mean, we have the advantage of hindsight, and we know that, of course, how the Second World War ends, and England is still England after that. Not for T.S. Eliot and not for his English readers of that time. It's compelling to read it that way. But he says at line 190, perhaps, we're back to Bert Norton, line 2, the fallibilist position again, epistemologically. Perhaps neither gain nor loss for us. And I've had seniors that say, this is maybe one of my favorite lines of the entire four quartets. For us, there is only the trying, the attempting. For those of you who like to quote your Yoda, there is no try, there is do or do not. Here, of course, there's the trying. The rest is not our business. In other words, the idea is that this, whatever it is we're going to attempt, we can only do what we can do. And then the rest, we have to let it go. It's almost as if T.S. Eliot is saying, I'm going to try and do my best here in four quartets. This will be the last poems that I will write with little getting. And he says, I'm going to try and hand it out to you, and hey, if it works for you, it works for you, and if it doesn't, I did the best that I could. Again, to summarize these lines, this is the middle way. And of course, this assault on words, it's translinguistic, it's beyond language. He says, I can't say exactly what it is I want to say, right? But in many ways, he seems to suggest that the giants, the great writers, do kind of paralyze us. He can't write anything to rival it. But he says, I'm still going to try. And then God kind of takes care of the rest. To finish the poem, he begins with the idea of home. And this is significant for us because, of course, Ithaca is where Odysseus is longing to get back to, right? Okay, everything is about the journey in Western thought. We've said this many times in our study of Homer, of Virgil, of Beowulf, the epic poem Beowulf, right? Home is where one starts from. We think of Frost's Deaths of the Hired Man. Go back and look at our comments on that one, and the notion of home is where you also can come back to. As we grow older, think of this as seniors, the world becomes stranger, which is really funny to think about. World in high school can't be stranger for you now. You've been here for 4 years, and yet some seniors will report, it does seem stranger to me now. It's like, there's so much I didn't know coming in. There's so much I still don't know. And the more I know, the more I recognize I need to know. As we grow older, the world becomes stranger. The pattern more complicated of dead and living. Not the intense moment, the epiphany, isolated, but with no before and after. But a lifetime burning in every moment. We're back to the imagery of fire again. And not the lifetime of one man only, but of old stones that cannot be deciphered. There's all kinds of fun things about this stone stuff. We were playing the game of stones earlier, of course, from Ecclesiastes 3. We can think, of course, of the Rosetta Stone that's going to help us to be able to read Egyptian hieroglyphics and all of that. I like to think as well the word old stones can also mean old men, old lives, old poets, old artists who can't be ultimately deciphered. Maybe he's suggesting you can't really ever completely understand a poem like Four Quartets in East Coker, but you can try, right? Back to the earlier line. And then back to the notion of Ecclesiastes 3. Again, we're coming to the end of East Coker, right? There's a time for the evening under starlight. There's a time to be out in nature. A time for the evening under lamplight, civilization. In other words, there's a balance between the two. And then in parentheses, the evening with the photograph album. Now, a lot's been made of this. What's going on with this? Because T.S. Eliot had a very difficult love life, we might say. Okay? Very difficult. He was in love with a woman, and it was painful the ways in which it just didn't work out for him. And she ultimately ended up in a hospital for the mentally insane and that kind of thing. And she challenged that notion. And Eliot had another woman that he ended up marrying at the end of his life and finally finding some peace in that relationship. The album, the photograph album, looking backwards, if you will. And then right away, the word love gets used. And it hasn't been used very much in this poem. Notice earlier when he said about love, love of the wrong thing. So be careful with your love here. But love, he says it. And these are lines that I challenged you with even in my intro lecture. Some of my students have said, they write this line down, they go around, they think about it for a while because it's a compelling line. Love is most nearly itself when here and now cease to matter. Of course, theologically, you can explain this easily, because as we said in our last lecture, the biblical text says God is love. And therefore, if you believe in love, you believe in God. But what is it to believe in love? I mean, what does that even mean? Well, here, notice, it ceases to care about here and now. Somehow it ceases to matter about time. Love, if you will, transcends time. And then that line is followed up by what some of us, myself included maybe, is the favorite line of the entire Four Quartets, certainly of East Coker. Old men ought to be explorers. Eliot writing this poem when he was 52. I don't know if you constitute that as old or not. When you're young, you think of 52 halfway to 100, right, as being pretty old. He says old men ought to be explorers, right? This immediately takes us to Tennyson's Ulysses. It certainly does me. I cannot rest from travels. I will drink life to the lees. Old times I have enjoyed greatly, have suffered greatly. You and I are old. Old age hath yet its honor and its toil. Death closes all, but something ere the end, some work of noble note may yet be done, not unbecoming men that strove with gods. Come, my mariners, 'tis not too late to seek a newer world. Remember, and then to finish, that which we are one equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. T.S. Eliot, of course, I'm sure, thinking very heavily about this, to follow knowledge like a sinking star beyond the utmost bounds of human thought. That Ulysses poem I've given a lecture on. You can go back and take a look at that. Old men ought to be explorers. Here and there does not matter. We must be still and still moving. Note the paradox, right? Into, notice our prepositions here, into another intensity. This is ecstasy, maybe, the epiphany, maybe, for a further union, a deeper communion. We're back to the dance at the beginning of this poem, and the arm in arm, hand in hand, jumping through the fire at the wedding dance, right? Through the dark, cold, and the empty desolation. The wave cry, we're going to get to that in Dry Salvages in the next poem. The wind cry, the vast waters of the petrel. We're back to another bird like a seagull, petrel. And the porpoise in Dry Salvages. The petrel will be Peter. The porpoise will be representative of Christ. In Dry Salvages, we'll get there. And then finally, the very last line again. And my end is my beginning. Well, again, this takes us this notion of home and the journey, everything. I mean, we think about that lovely little book called The Alchemist. I mean, the notion of the journey, borrowed obviously from Odysseus, maybe most beautifully for T.S. Eliot for sure, represented in Dante, the notion of the journey, right? Notice again this idea about how old age, it's confusing, and yet still we got to continue to be explorers, what we will maybe consider to be lifelong learning. Let's go ahead and jump now to the end, 2a. The trying is what matters. The journey is what matters. The exploration is what matters, right? Lifelong learning, we might say. At 2b, of course, the symbols, the middle way, again, that struggle between beginning and end, death and birth, darkness and light, all of that, right? The struggle to try to put into words what can't be put into words. Right? At 3a, well, I just quoted from Tennyson's Ulysses. I think that's a good way for us to end East Coker, the brilliance of that poem, right? To say, to strive, to seek to find, and not to yield, no matter what happens in your life. Never quit, never give up. Finally, at 3b, this is an interesting question. Do you think of yourself as an explorer? Has your high school experience been an exploration? Why are you so excited to graduate? Many will say, because I get to get out of here. Here to do what? I mean, what are you going to do? Well, the simple answer is, I'm going to explore. Really? Explore till when? Well, this is what I think Thoreau meant when he said the massive men lead lives of quiet desperation. They go to a point, and kind of like Auden's Unknown Citizen, and then they just kind of fit in to a certain groove, a rut, and then they never explore anymore. Eliot reminding all of us, well, the one thing you got to make sure you do is continue to explore. If you don't think of yourself as an explorer, is it maybe time for you to start? Well, congratulations, you're halfway through the 4 quartets, and we now will turn to the third of the 4 quartets, the Dry Salvages, and we'll leave England and we'll come to America. T.S. Eliot, both an American poet as well as an English poet. I hope that you're enjoying this study as much as am I. Thank you.